All right. It's so much fun for me to get to talk about non-technical things or not really going deep into coding interviews because so much of what I talk about is coding interviews. What I want to talk about is sort of the broader picture of how do we get opportunities and what should we be doing? And particularly when you don't know what you're doing or where you're going. I feel like that probably resonates with a lot of people where we don't know exactly where we're going to go in the long run. So what do we do here? So who am I? Well, here's what ChatGPT says, which actually is pretty good. It didn't hallucinate anything this time, which is a real step up. Um, but I'm best known as Sakrusa. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Said for the Cracking the Interview series, which I guess a lot of the software engineers or product managers probably know of. And so I have these books, and so what I want to talk about a bit is kind of like, how did I get here? What was I doing? What are the mistakes I was making? And and hopefully impart a bit of advice for all of you here. So since I am basically a professional interviewer, more or less, I want to start off with this interview questions, very kind of stereotypical thing of where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And I think it's a great question for people to ask themselves. I also think it's kind of bullshit. I think our lives, our careers are actually, for so many people, kind of unpredictable. It's not a straight line path. It's more of a curvy thing with jumping from one place to another. And so it's a good question. You can set goals, you can do that, but also things are really unpredictable. I never set out to say, I think I'm going to go write a book. That was never something I said. I was literally writing my book and I did not know I was writing a book. I sort of got. So, I am not a writer. That even now, when someone calls me a writer, I'm kind of like, really? Well, I guess I'm a writer. And which sounds ridiculous because I have 4 now, almost 5 books out, and I'm still not really totally comfortable calling myself a writer because in my mind, everything about what I've done is about coding. I started coding in high school, though that's somewhat of a stretch because I spent a lot of time coding, but learned really shockingly little in high school about computer science. I spent 3 years doing C++ and did not know what pointers were by the end of it. So I had a lot of time, very little actual knowledge. Went to college, did computer science there, taught a bunch in college and after college, spent a lot of time actually teaching. And then was a software engineer, a bit at Microsoft and Apple during college, and then at Google for a few years after college. Nothing about this says, writing. It's not, I've actually, now I guess I do see myself as a pretty good writer, but it certainly was not something I saw myself as when I was younger. I was not known in high school as like a good writer. I was fine, but like I was competent, but I wasn't a good writer. And that actually has a lot to do with how writing is taught in high schools, but never saw myself as a writer. And so it actually took a really long time for me to get a book out. So here's kind of how, I get this question a lot of like, why did you write a book? And I'm like, well, it kind of happened by accident, actually. And this is why when I say this idea of saying, here's where I want to be in 5 or 10 years, it's a great thing to talk about, to think about, but it also, you have to realize it's in a lot of ways really unrealistic because things are actually so unpredictable. So the reason the way that I wound up kind of accidentally writing a book was in college. I, had various little things I was coding and side projects, one of which was this little, website I eventually put up around, some interview questions I was asked. And, the site started to get some traffic. And then I eventually started to think, really kind of took probably a year to post-college, start thinking about, okay, so like, how do I make money off of this? So it's not like a complete waste of my time. So I tried ads, and I didn't realize immediately what I should have realized, which is that ads really don't work as a way of monetizing websites. You have to make a lot of traffic for that to really work. But I tried that, didn't really work. And eventually with some prodding by a manager, actually, I switched to doing, okay, let me offer mock interviews. Did a little better, but it still didn't quite hit. And then I think I got the idea. I mean, this is several years. This is actually after I left Google, probably three years after college. I think I got the idea from, it might have been 4 Hour Work Week, I forget, of writing a, trying to sell like a little, 20-page PDF on the website. And I remember the first day it came out, I was like, oh shit, like that works. I remember the first day I made $237 and my mind was blown. I was like, oh my God, this is something. I think I have something. The something was not a book. The something was a way to monetize this stupid website, which is wasting my time. But it actually took 3 years after that, when it was actually selling quite well electronically, for me to realize, like, and I just kind of kept building up that PDF for me to actually realize, like, what started as this 20-page thing that really could not have been called a book was now a several 100-page document, and it is a book. And I need to start treating it as a book. And it took me 3 years to realize that, largely because of this vision of, there's this thing called writing, and there's this thing called being an author, this thing called being a book, and it's not me. I am not an author. And it's this kind of form of imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people probably struggle with, or it's really hard to realize what you have. And actually, when I made Wiley, which is a major publisher, came to me and asked me to co-author, or to author a book for them, I remember I was so flattered, because it was like, oh my God, like this is legitimate now that a real publisher wants me. That's a real book, but this other thing I've done, which is still my best-selling book, is not a real book. And it's really hard sometimes to see yourself the way that I think other people see you. And it took so long a lot of times because I didn't see myself that way. And also even if I had set out to say I want to write a book, I would not have known how to go about that. And I think that's true for a lot of people. We may have these goals, or may not even have these goals, maybe accidentally doing something. We don't really know what we're doing. I didn't know anything about publishing, agents, printing, any of these things, nor did I have any access to those things. And so it took a really, really long time. But then, something kind of happened. It sold well electronically, and it took actually my now husband being like, you need to start printing this now, for me to be like, okay, fine, let me figure out how to do this. And then, of course, eventually became super popular. And what's interesting is, from there, it sort of turned into this, a lot of what I do now, in addition to books, is consulting. And what happened with consulting is and it's actually a funny story. Somebody who read one of my books wrote me and said, hey, like, we're going through an acquisition right now. Our team is getting, interviewed kind of in the acqui-hire situation. Can you come in and prepare us for interviews? And I absolutely did not want to do that, for a number of reasons. One of which being that while I enjoy interviewing, doing it like back to back all day, several days in a row, is really, really exhausting. And I'm in Palo Alto. They're in San Francisco, which is 45 minutes north, and I'm 8.5 months pregnant, and I did not want to do that. But instead of saying no, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to say no. I'm going to throw out an amount of money that I'm going to charge them, and like, if they accept that, then fine. If they don't, then I walk, and that's totally fine. And then it turns out they accepted it. And it actually sort of translated into this whole business around consulting, flipped it around to doing a lot more work nowadays with companies to build out their hiring process, to do interviewer training, to take a lot of the advice I give to candidates and flip it around to doing, hey, here's what interviewers should do. And this sort of comes to my first thing, which is that, I say yes to opportunities. I think sometimes I'll hear this advice from like super rich, super successful people of like the importance of saying no and prioritizing your time and this and that. And it's not that I think they're wrong, but I also think they're coming from perspective of the people who've already made it, who've already done all this. And the reality is that they have opportunities that are, there's a lot of selection bias going on there. And what I've seen, if I look at kind of the paths my life has taken, the things I've done, almost all the major changes have come through saying yes to something kind of unexpected, and often something that I actually didn't really want to do. And so that's kind of my first thing. It's like, accept opportunities and don't let the either imposter syndrome or just the like, I don't really feel like it, get in the way of saying yes to things when you don't know what is actually going to come out of them. There's so much value in just saying yes, seeing what happens. And that includes just like meeting a friend of a friend for coffee who wants advice about their career. Say yes, see what happens. So second interview question, what recent accomplishment are you most proud of and why? So I'm going to give actually a non-technical answer for this. Because then I think this resonates with something you heard in some part of the introductory material about, that our lives are, well, let me say this, our lives are more than just our careers. Their lives are a lot more beyond, a lot bigger than that. And so I'm gonna talk about something non-technical I did. And it's sort of unexpected, but, and this is kind of the last sort of, one of the most recent really big accomplishments I was super proud of. And it was, November 8th, 2022, which was the prior election day. And it was, one of my best friend had asked me to help her run for our local school board in Palo Alto. I said no, actually, despite my early advice, said no a dozen times or so before I was like, finally like, okay, yes. And what made it such a huge accomplishment is that we, and I do say we because it is absolutely hugely a team effort. And, we were very much the underdogs and we ended up winning in a landslide. And so I want to talk a little bit about how that happened. So she came to me in July and was like, can you help me? Can you run my campaign for me? And I said, no, I'm busy. I can't do this. And finally, she broke me down and I finally was like, fine, I'll take this over. By early August, I was like, I didn't tell her this because I don't want to be discouraging to other people, but I was thinking definitely like, we cannot do this. We need to drop out. And frankly, it wasn't just me saying that. I was actually being told that by a bunch of other people. Drop out. You guys cannot win this. It is too late. You're up. You don't even know what you're up against. And the reality is we didn't. Had we known what it took to win, what it took to run a campaign, we actually would not have entered because we kind of thought, it's like we're smallish towns, just school board. It's like you raise a few $1,000s and you put up some signs and flyers and whatever. And it's like, no, this is a whole giant, messy, like political campaign. And it's actually a big thing, it turns out. And while the candidate is focusing on just meeting with people, me as campaign manager doing all of these other things and figuring out how to do it when we don't know anything. And it's not just this logistical stuff of flyers and mailers and figuring out lawn signs. Where do you get them printed? What are the laws about all of these things? There's laws for everything. It's not just doing all this logistical stuff. There is a whole political complexity, at least in not all areas are this chaotic and dramatic. Palo Alto is. There's a whole political thing where we really honestly and a lot of it was on me because I was running the kind of all the stuff that was not doing the actual meetings. We didn't have what it took in a lot of ways. We didn't have other candidates are going through actual political training. We didn't have that. We didn't have endorsements. We were apparently supposed to raise like $30,000. We're like, what? That's crazy. And it was a incredibly hard thing where we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have the connections. And we were being told actively, just drop out now. And probably the first sort of sign that maybe we could do this was really late August, where we held our first major campaign event. We had a huge attendance and it was like, oh my gosh. And it reminded me of the first time when I sold this little PDF of, it's not that we've won, but there's a spark, there's a something, there's a maybe we can. And I want to kind of call that out because I think in our careers, we have these moments of, hey, maybe we can do this. Maybe something is happening. Notice that and lean on those moments because there's so many other things that feel so discouraging. And what came from, me saying yes to this thing that was a huge amount of time was all these really unexpected things of a really amazing, very, very different network that I now have in Palo Alto. So much learning, so much personal growth, and frankly, making a really big impact on the community because it changed the landscape of what happened even this past election. And so this little thing of saying yes, even if it was after me saying repeatedly no, made this huge impact both personally and on my broader community. And a lot of what, the way when we kind of reflected back on how did we win, it was by making a lot of mistakes and accepting that this is part of the journey and getting help from as many people as you can and growing this really diverse team. And that comes down to my sort of second lesson here, which is grow your personal team. And what I mean by your personal team is the friends who will be there, who will have your back and support you, but also this broader network. A lot of the opportunities we get in life are not from our friends. They're from friends of friends, because it's, for those who do computer science or math, that's, you have n friends, you have n squared, roughly, friends of friends. So grow that broader network and let it be really diverse. Don't be laser focused on these are the people who can help me. And part of growing that sort of personal team is being the kind of person who is helpful. So, final interview question. Tell me about a past project and what would you change? So, one of the things that when I started cracking the coding interview, and clearly kind of one of the sort of pillar values for my career is this idea of be good. And what I mean by that is two things. One, produce high quality things. That doesn't mean being a perfectionist. I'm actually not a perfectionist, but I do say, hey, if I'm going to put something out into the world, I want it to be good. I want it to be high quality. I don't want to throw out crap, basically. But the other sort of big principle is that's really the more important thing I wanted to talk about is be good in the sense of be a good person, do the right thing. The interview prep space is kind of a weird space where there is this mix of people who, and maybe this is probably true for a lot of careers, but there's this mix of people who are really trying to do the right thing and help people. And then there's a lot of other people or forces out there who are willing to sell advice that isn't very good, that just is an attempt to make money. And so, within about a year of cracking the coding interview coming out, the most recent edition, people started asking, when are you going to come out with a new edition? And I always took this because they're like, you'd make more money if you came out with a new edition. And I remember professors doing this in college, churning out edition after edition when they didn't really make any changes. And so I always took a principle of, I think the right thing is to wait until I had I really felt like I had something major to change. And that's why I'm doing this now. And I want to call out this example because I think, we talk about the importance of ethics. And if you ever take an ethics class in college, they talk about, these like really massive things where it's like, do you produce this medication that could kill these children, but blah, 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 blah. And like, okay, sure, those things happen. But like most of our things most of the kind of ethical things are not going to be that big in our lives. Most of them are going to be much smaller things. And for me, it's a question of, do I come out with a new edition for the purpose of just pretending that there's changes when there aren't? And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to wait until I really have something major to change. In this case, it was bringing in a lot more data, deeper concepts. There have been some sort of changes to the landscape of interviewing in the last few years. And so it's saying, yes, now this is a time where I can really be good, do the right thing. And so that's why it's now. And so that's sort of my third lesson for you, which is be good, produce good things, produce high quality work, but also let ethics be sort of a core thing. Don't push the limits on things, because that will, and one, that's probably not the way you want to live your life, but also it'll come back to bite you in the end. And so, certainly made a dozen mistakes along the way, many more than a dozen. But I think these are the kind of three things that have been really important to me, growing, saying yes to opportunities, I'm not a big, go out and network kind of person, but in the sort of the overly aggressive networking sense, but growing that personal team is really, really important, and build a network that is diverse, what I really mean by that is be really open-minded to who you want to meet with, who you want to build connections with. Don't be super focused on this person is a good connection because they're going to get me this stuff in life, because that does not end up working out very well in the end. And then be good. And so as you go out to this conference, I want you to kind of keep those. You have an amazing opportunity to meet with a ton of people. And I would love for you to just keep these things in mind, accept opportunities, grow that team, grow a diverse network, and be good to yourself and to others. So with that, Happy to turn, I'll just keep on this side. Happy to turn over to questions. Okay, so somebody asked in the chat, what advice do you have for growing your team if your personal connections are, let's say, pretty small? So this is a start, doing things like this, right? Going to conferences. But also remember that your network is N squared, it's not N. It's your friends of friends, not just your friends. So go to meetups, and remember that also your network extends nowadays to online. So it may be a lot broader than you think. And then the other thing is being helpful to the people around you. Helps really, it doesn't necessarily help you, well, it does actually end up helping you extend your network in the end because other people start coming to you for advice. But yeah, I mean, go to events, put yourself out there, and make the effort to reach out to people as well. Be the person who invites people. Think about, and I also want to say, think about your network as being both your social and your professional network. So there's all sorts of ways to build your social network. And part of that is like, be the organizer, be the person who gets people together. How did you know when it was time to switch jobs and explore new opportunities versus staying in your same role and being comfortable? That's a great question. And I think it's very personal. But I'll say the moment for me with Google was, at one point, I had some teammates on one team who let's just say weren't very kind. And the path to fixing that was to switch teams. Great. And then I had a team that was great. They're really nice people. I liked them. And it was great for a while. And what I noticed was, and this is just very personal for me, what I noticed was that I got to a point where I realized that I was starting to go through this calculation of, okay, well, like, it's 5:30, it's 6 p.m., it's this time, like, can I get away with going home now without it looking bad? And I just realized I was effectively watching the clock every day. And I was like, you know what, this isn't, I kind of had this mindset of I need to hold out because, stock vesting 4 years, whatever. I just realized I was constantly watching the clock, and I was like, you know what, I don't want to do this. I don't want to live my life that way. And so I left without another job. I was like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to travel. I have enough money saved up and travel for a bit, and then I'm going to, come back, and I'm going to look at a startup. I knew I had to go in that order because otherwise I would have to, like, startups kind of want you to start immediately. So, and I wanted to look at really, really small startups. So for me, it was the watching the clock was like, this isn't for me. How do you deal with imposter syndrome? I love that question. So for me, it's sort of cataloging all the times that it's two things to deal with it. One is sort of, and this is sort of maybe me being sort of overly rational, but I've sort of cataloged all the times when I felt like like I can't do something, right? So running this campaign, which granted, I really didn't know what I was doing, writing this book, doing this and that, all of these times that I didn't feel like I could do something and realizing that I could, plus realizing how widespread imposter syndrome is, realizing that when you talk to people, basically every single person is feeling imposter syndrome or has very recently. And so that allows me to be like, to kind of say, okay, recognize that feeling in me that's like, I don't feel like I could do this, and be like, okay, that is this thing that I feel. This is the feeling I have before I do something that's scary. And I need to separate that feeling and kind of compartmentalize it from the feeling that I, cannot do this, right? It's like if you've ever done rock climbing, you're high up on the wall and you feel scared. And that fear is normal because you feel like if you fall, you could die. But also you are on a harness and you know that you won't fall and well, you might fall, but you won't get hurt if you do, right? So compartmentalize, say, this is the fear. This is why the fear is happening. And it's happening because imposter syndrome is basically universal. And it doesn't actually mean anything about the reality of how you sort of should feel. What advice do you have to people going through layoffs? That was a private message. So, go out and, first of all, network, meet people. Well, one thing I want to say is I've had a lot of friends over the years who have gotten laid off, and this sounds a little bit unfair because I know this isn't totally true, but I've had all these friends who've gotten laid off. Almost every single one has actually wound up in a better position post layoff. So that's probably a big selection bias, but it's just an interesting note. But when you get laid off, network. Your resume, there's some interesting data that I've gone into. It's beyond cracking the coding interview. That it's not that you shouldn't prioritize your resume, but the jobs are really going to come from networking, not from creating the perfect resume and sending it off to an online resume system. So network, and also use your time. I don't know what if you are a software engineer, use your time to build cool projects, learn interesting things, learn new things. Will make you feel better because you're productive, but also it'll end up building a stronger story when you talk to employers. Do you have any tips for putting yourself out there and doing interviews when you're afraid of failing rejection? So 2 things I'd say. One is, again, compartmentalize that fear. I don't mean hide it. I just mean say, okay, this is the fear, and it's this, and this is why I'm feeling it, and because it's very natural, and it doesn't mean that I will fail, and it doesn't mean that failing is a personal fault as much as look, the standards are really high. There's so much randomness. So many people get rejected by a company, reapply 6 months or a year later, are not substantially different candidate, but then get an offer. Just know that, look, there's this randomness, and it is a numbers game. And really just embedding that in your brain that it is a numbers game, and you just have to get up and do it over and over and over and over again. What advice do you have for those who have issues with bias from non-traditional backgrounds of the CS degree? Asking trivia questions I would actually use. Yeah, so there's going to be companies that are going to be biased with people without CS degrees. One, take some heart that as you get further in your career, you're going to deal with less and less of that bias. People just start prioritizing it. Don't just stop caring so much about where you went to college, if you went to college, if you have a CS degree. So it is in many senses, a somewhat temporary problem. And focus a lot on employers who, not all employers are so biased about it. A lot of them are, look a lot more about, at your projects, what you've done beyond college, because frankly, we don't learn all that much as undergrads. And so build up those sort of outside of work things. And again, it's just this, repeat, do a lot of interviews, practice. The other thing I want to call it, I think actually I meant to say this on the last question, but as far as advice for failing interviews is and dealing with that is actually try to be an interviewer. Try to there's services that do mock interviews. Sign up and actually be an interviewer. Having the experience being on the other side of the table helps you kind of normalize a lot more and understand a lot more why interviewers do certain things. I've seen it really help people with getting more comfortable with rejection, and getting more comfortable with the interview process is getting experience as an interviewer. During coding interview, I blanked out, even though I was able to solve the problem afterwards. How do I overcome it? So I know that feeling. I remember taking, I went to business school, and I remember I had to take the GMAT, and I had the same thing where I had to take this test, and I had never taken a computer adaptive test before. And when the questions started getting harder, I basically panicked. And so for me, what helped me a lot is because what happens in our brain is we start to blank or panic, and then we start to focus on how we're doing that and how that's hurting us. And then that's all we can think about, and we can't really get ourselves out of that. And so what helped me a lot is having something to do. And in my case, it was literally answering a few questions wrong just to get myself out of this mindset of panicking and just having something to do. In an interview, what I would suggest doing is you need something to fall back on, something to do to deal with that panic. And what I would recommend you do for a coding interview is draw a new example, walk through the problem on that example. It's something concrete, it's something actionable, and Even if you're kind of panicking, you can do that. You can draw a new example of input and output, and you can walk through it. And often that actually helps unstick us and actually help us see the algorithm as well. But find an action you can take to get out of overthinking this panic. Reaching 1 year since graduation, what can you do about employment gap? And actually very similar to the most recent question too. So why don't you start a company? And I'm being somewhat serious here. There is no fine line with this is a company. I mean, this is the problem I had with my books, was like I was writing a book and I didn't realize I was writing a book because I didn't see myself as writing a book. Start a company. Have a project, by which I mean have a project, work on it, think about how to monetize it. That is something you don't have to pay employees. You can be the only employee, but have something that you're doing other than just, interviews and interview prep. And then it's not an employment gap. You've been spending your time working on a company, and maybe they'll act, maybe in some cases that'll turn into a real company. In some cases, often it won't, and it'll be just a cool experience. You've learned a bunch, and you've got a bunch of, and you get a bunch of experience that you can then talk to prospective employers with. What could be a good way to engage my N Squared network on LinkedIn? So what I would recommend, I mean, this is a very technical answer, but your N Squared networks comes in when you're talking about, okay, I want to get a job and I want to interview with companies like this. Right? You can go in LinkedIn, filter for second degree connections, and look at people who are managers, and then find your common connections and ping them and ask if they're comfortable making a connection, reaching out and connecting you with them. And maybe and if they are, great. Otherwise, reach out to them, not anonymously, directly. You can often guess at employers' email address, the email addresses at their company, because a lot of times it's first name dot last name, or you can figure out the format, and reach out to them. Find a common, if you can find something in common with them. Hey, I really enjoyed this blog post you made about this thing. That's wonderful. Otherwise, just reach out and ask if they're willing to, get coffee with you, have a call with you to talk about, maybe there's something you can seek their advice on. Just do that and reach out. And again, I want to be clear that this is a numbers game. The numbers just are not totally in your favor right now. And what that means for you is, one, rejection is a lot less personal. Yes, there's more rejection, but it's also a lot less personal because as the numbers are not in your favor, it becomes a lot more random. But it also means that for you just have to, do a lot more reach out before something sticks.